Welcome to Wildflower Weekly with Ashley Adair. I'm Ashley, and I work as an agriculture and natural resources educator in Montgomery County, Indiana. Going outside is a great way to keep mental health in good shape during the COVID-19 pandemic, and now is a better time than ever to get familiar with some of the plant life we have out in our woods. Just make sure to remember all physical distancing guidelines as you make your way outdoors. This week, we'll bring you the latest in the world of wildflowers and provide some updates on plants that we saw last week. The forest floor is absolutely carpeted with plant life this week. Many of the small white specks you can see in this image come from the Claytonia virginica flower that we've discussed in the last couple of weeks. Now, the trail is much more obvious than it has been in weeks past. Most of the tree canopy has yet to leaf out, but Ohio buckeyes are starting to push leaves out this week. The rest of the woods will soon follow, so we'll be catching a lot of our spring ephemeral wildflowers blooming in the next couple of weeks. For those of you joining us for the first time, this video series has mostly been discussing spring ephemeral wildflowers. As a review, a spring ephemeral is a woodland plant that completes its above-ground life cycle in a short period of time, usually between March and June in Indiana. These plants provide many benefits to woodland animals at this time of year, serving as food and nectar resources for insects and larger animals alike. Let's set the scene. I'm walking at McCormick Woods, a Purdue-managed property near Purdue's campus. I walked this on Wednesday, April 8th. The weather was a balmy 80 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. This site is open to the public for hiking and mountain biking and is partially managed by a local mountain biking group. The photo on the left is seen from the south entrance, which is adjacent to the golf cart path on the Ackerman-Allen Golf Course. Now you can see quite a bit more green peeking up compared to last week. The weather for the week of April 5th through 11th was quite warm. However, this was followed by a major drop-off in overnight lows. Between Thursday night and Friday morning, we've had freeze warnings issued for the area. Most of the time, frost and light freezes don't bother our spring ephemeral species too much. Just as a reminder, I'm hiking in the northwest part of Tippecanoe County. If you're just as few as 15 miles north or south of me, you could be experiencing different conditions and different stages of plant growth and bloom at this time of year. So let's walk. This is what McCormick Woods is looking like during our third week of Wildflower Weekly. Notice how the north-facing slopes along this creek here are relatively bare compared to the landscape behind it. Here's how it works. Each slide has information organized in a particular way. Here is the photo, here is the scientific name, and here is the common name. Below the common name, you'll find some interesting facts about the plant, how it's pollinated, its role in the ecosystem, and more. As a note, we've added an update graphic to show you what's happening with a wildflower that we saw last week. However, this week we'll be leaving out a few species that we've watched come up and bloom over the last 2 weeks because not much has changed with them. This includes plants like cutleaf toothwort and spring beauty. This week we're going to start with a bloodroot update. Bloodroot is a fast flower to seed plant. Almost all of the bloodroot that we saw last week has already begun setting seed. Blooms only last a day or so on these plants. We do see some new plants popping up here and there, but the flowers are less numerous than last week. Because the leaves have all opened up, this is a good chance to notice all of the variation that these plants have when it comes to leaf size and shape. Notice that the leaves most often have between 5 and 7 lobes. Oddly enough, the plant on the bottom left has 6 lobes. Also notice that the height, width, and overall shape of the leaves can vary quite a bit from plant to plant. Seeds will develop in a pod like the one shown here in the red circle to the left. Do you remember the word myrmecoccary? The seeds on these plants have eliosomes, so ants will take them to their colonies to feed on. The ants inadvertently provide a fertile environment for the seeds to develop in. The seeds will germinate next year from the anthill if it's in a suitable location. We've got a fungus alert. Puccinia mariae wilsoniae, otherwise known as spring beauty rust. If you find a spring beauty that's covered in these kind of tentacle-like orange pustules, you have probably found spring beauty rust. You'll also notice that the plant can be kind of curled up and a little misshapen when it's affected by this disease. Rust is a type of fungus. Its spores can travel far and wide through air currents. Some rust can even travel on air currents as high up as the jet stream. This is why plant pathogens, such as southern corn rust, can travel such a great distance from the south each year and infect our own corn crop here in Indiana. There are many rust pathogens that affect both our food crops and wild plants. Our next plant is Viola pubescens, otherwise known as the downy yellow violet. We finally started to see blooms on our violet plants this week. So it turns out that we have two species of violet in these woods, and the first one is our yellow violet. It's attractive to several species of bees, and it's a cousin of that common violet that we've talked about in the last couple of weeks. The seeds of the downy yellow violet are sometimes consumed by game birds like the bobwhite and wild turkey. So let's check up on that other violet, Viola sororia sororia. The common violet is blooming now. You'll notice that the common violet's flower is a bit larger than the downy yellow violet, but it's just as attractive. Next up is an update on trout lily. Now we know that the trout lilies we've been seeing in these woods are that of the white trout lily. You, however, may be seeing some yellow trout lily where you are. Most woods are only home to one species of trout lily at a time, so if you're seeing yellow trout lily where you are, it's unlikely that you'll find white trout lily in that same place. Trout lilies absolutely dominate the forest floor in the northwest part of McCormick Woods. The blooms of mature plants, remember those having 2 leaves are mature plants, are highly conspicuous among a carpet of immature single-leaved trout lilies. We also have a mayapple update. This member of the barberry family looks like a small patio umbrella. Here's an example of a mature plant that has 2 leaves, or 2 patio umbrellas, that will start flowering soon. Notice the flower bud set between the 2 leaves on this mature plant. We hope to see this one blooming very shortly. In this image, many of the larger plants that you're seeing are actually mayapple plants. This is a common sight in woods at this time of year. Our next plant is Asarum canadense, otherwise known as the Canadian wild ginger. This plant is named for its aromatic rhizomes, which are sometimes used as a substitute for ginger in traditional cooking. This plant is typically fuzzy. The flowers are especially fuzzy when they start to emerge. The foliage is toxic, but ants are responsible for seed distribution due to that myrmecoccary that we keep talking about. That means that there are eliosomes on the seeds, and those ants will take those seeds back to their colonies and feed on those fatty deposits for nutrition. You can see just how hairy these plants are, especially at the stem in this close-up image of the leaves. The leaves here are also very heart-shaped. We have an update on wild geranium. Remember that this is one of our showier spring ephemerals, but we haven't seen it bloom yet. We're reviewing some details on this geranium this week, and we're waiting for those blooms to start forming. Remember that the blooms that we expect to see are pinkish and purple in color. It looks like we're going to have a lot of flowers to look forward to over the course of the next couple of weeks. It looks like we'll have lots of flowers to look forward to over the course of the next couple of weeks, judging by how many leaves we're seeing on the ground. Hopefully, by next week's episode, we'll be able to show you some of the first flowers of this plant. We also have an update on Florkia proserpinicoides, the false mermaid weed. This plant is that common inhabitant of moist and shady forests, but you may not be seeing it where you are. The flowers are white and extremely tiny, so not showy at all, but judging by the flower buds that we're seeing, as you can see here, we're hoping to see some flowers by next week. This plant seems to like to share space with the trout lily in this particular woods. Our next update is on Dicentra cucullaria. As it turns out, almost all of the plants that we were looking at last week turned out to be Dutchman's breeches rather than squirrel corn. I'll keep an eye out for squirrel corn in the next few weeks, but I doubt that we'll find it because there is so much Dutchman's breeches in these woods. The plant, as a reminder, is visually similar to the popular ornamental known as bleeding heart, which is a lot easier to see now that the plant has started blooming this week. This plant produces nectar that is favored by bees, and it's yet another spring ephemeral whose seed is distributed by ants. The resemblance to pants on a clothesline is honestly uncanny. Even though this plant looks delicate, it stands up to freezing temperatures. The blooms will typically survive the frequent frosts that we have in early spring in Indiana. The blooms will typically survive the frequent frosts that we have in early spring in Indiana. We have an update on our next plant, the Trillium flexipes, otherwise known as drooping trillium. This trillium is typically larger than the red trillium that we've been seeing, and it lacks patterned leaves. The flower buds on this plant have begun forming this week. We have lots of trillium blooms to look forward to in the next couple of weeks, as both the red trillium and drooping trillium start to bloom. Notice the flower bud and how it droops off to the side. This is different from red trillium buds, which are formed where the leaves meet the stem. We have another update on the fern that we saw last week. We've positively identified our fern as the lowland brittle fern. Most ferns are much easier to tell apart once their fiddle heads have fully unfurled. This is one of the most common fragile ferns found in our area. It's just as ephemeral as our wildflowers, so those leaves that you see today are going to disappear by early summer. It wouldn't be a Wildflower Weekly without a short invasive species update, so let's take a look and see what our different invasive species are up to. Our Asian bush honeysuckle continues to push out leaves this week. They're not too much bigger than they were last week, but with the warm temperatures from early this week, the bush honeysuckle continues to push out leaves. The leaves are quite a bit larger this week, but they're not too much more numerous. There's no sign of flowers yet on most of the plants that I've seen, but we'll keep a close eye out for that and update you as soon as we see them. This week has been an excellent time to spot invasive bush honeysuckle at a distance. This woods, just off Cumberland Avenue in West Lafayette, has many bush honeysuckle that have taken up residence right at the wood's edge, which is one of its preferred habitats. It's often the first thing to start leafing out, so it's easy to spot at the beginning of the growing season. It's also easy to spot at the end of the growing season when it holds on to its bright green leaves late into the year, even after most other deciduous species have lost their leaves. So here's what garlic mustard is up to. Turns out it's capable of growing absolutely anywhere, including on the side of a dead tree in a bed of dead moss. This garlic mustard is getting ready to bloom. The buds shown here are just about ready to burst. We have a new invasive species this week to talk about, Rosa multiflora, otherwise known as multiflora rose. This is a perennial plant in the rose family that's native to Eastern Asia. It was first imported to North America in the 1860s to be used as a rootstock for ornamental roses. It was also used for erosion control and living fence in the 1930s. However, it escaped cultivation and has become a noxious weed, particularly in the eastern United States. This is one of those plants that maintains green coloration on its stems throughout the winter, which makes it easier to spot. Winter is also a great time to scout and control it. Repeated mowings or cuttings at a frequency of 4 to 6 times per year over the course of 3 to 5 years has been shown to be effective for managing this plant. Herbicide is also an effective tool to manage this plant. However, you should make sure to manage it carefully because the thorns on this plant are nothing to joke about. Finally, I feel that I would be doing you all a disservice without mentioning one very common invasive plant in our landscapes and sometimes even our woods where we find our spring ephemerals, the Callery pear. This tree has been widely planted, especially in the last 25 years or so, in urban and suburban landscapes for its value as an ornamental tree. It's a prolific bloomer, to say the least. When the popular cultivar Bradford was introduced, the claim was that it was a sterile hybrid that could not produce viable seed. This turned out to be untrue. When the fruits, which are inedible to us, soften in the cold months, birds take the fruit and deposit the seed throughout the landscape. Additionally, this tree is not long-lived, partially due to its susceptibility to storm damage. Notice the structure of the tree. The branches reach upright at sharp angles, which results in a weak connection to the trunk. These branches can easily break or peel off of the rest of the tree, exposing it to disease. If you want to replace a Callery pear, there are several native species that have high landscape value. These include the American plum, which has white blooms and an amazing spring fragrance, the eastern redbud, which is a small tree with purple-pink blooms, and flowering dogwood, which comes in many colors, including white. For more information on these invasive species, please refer to the links here. We have links from the Indiana DNR, Invasive Species Info, invasive.org, and Purdue Extension. Thanks for joining us this week, and make sure to stay safe and practice physical distancing, but also to get outside when you can. As always, follow Purdue Extension Montgomery County on Facebook for more updates. We'll see you next week. For more information on these invasive species, please refer to the links here. We have links from the Indiana DNR, Invasive Species Info, invasive.org, and Purdue Extension. Thanks for joining us this week, and make sure to stay safe and practice physical Thanks for joining us this week, and make sure to stay safe and practice physical distancing, but also to get outside when you can. As always, follow Purdue Extension Montgomery County on Facebook for more updates. We'll see you next week.